Men, what's the creepiest thing a woman has said or done to you? Welcome back to our channel. If you're new here, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Story 1. Back when I was around 19 or 20, I had a part-time job working at the counter at a local shop. After my shifts, I'd go out in my car and start finding notes tucked under the windshield wiper. They were casual at first, saying things like, "You're so cute, I'd love to get to know you." Since there was no name, I just shrugged it off. But as time went on, the notes became more frequent, eventually turning into lengthy love letters. These letters talked about feeling lonely and wanting to be my girlfriend, but also mentioned being too shy to approach me. At that point, I started to get a bit concerned, so I asked my coworkers if they knew anything. None of them did, though they thought it was pretty funny. Then, things escalated. One night, I walked out of my car and saw nothing on the windshield. But once I got inside, I found a wrapped present on the passenger seat with an envelope taped to it. I opened the gift. It was a very expensive bottle of whiskey, which I threw out. The letter attached was explicit and intense, definitely written by a woman. I still had no clue who could be behind it. This continued over the next few nights, each time with a different gift: a bag of weed, a CD from one of my favorite bands, a gift card to a restaurant. At this point, I was feeling really uneasy, so I spoke with my boss to see if there was anything they could do. They basically brushed it off and wished me luck with the situation. That night, I triple-checked that my car doors were locked. But after my shift, I found another bottle of alcohol and a letter waiting for me inside the car. The next day, I called my boss and quit. I never went back to that job, and I never found out who it was. Story 2. This took place when my friends and I were still immersed in the club and live band scene during our college days. We went to a bar, had a couple of rounds of beer. Not enough to get drunk, but certainly enough to enjoy ourselves that night. Everything was going well until two girls approached us. One of them seemed fine, but the other had this resting bee face that in a strange way was actually kind of attractive. My friends were like, "All right, cool. Two girls making the first move? Let's see where this goes." The second girl sat next to me, and from the moment she did, something about her just struck me as off. She would put a beer in front of me and tell me, "Chug that." I would ignore it each time, and she didn't seem bothered by it. But strange things like that kept happening throughout the night. Almost like she was issuing commands. She would say, "Dance with me," or "Take a shot," while her friend was chatting with my other friends. Then, out of nowhere, this girl seemed to undergo a complete transformation, almost as if she were possessed. She shot us this intense, hateful glare, and her eyes were filled with pure malice. In a flash, she scratched one of my friends on the neck. To cut a long story short, we bolted from that place so fast it was like an instinct. I sobered up in an instant. On the drive home, all of us were left in stunned silence, unable to process what had just happened. Story 3. The girl I was dating asked if I had changed the locks since breaking up with my ex months earlier. I told her no, but she wasn't a crazy person, so I never really worried about it. She then said that if I didn't change the locks, she wouldn't feel comfortable sleeping over, so I ended up changing them. The next day, my ex sent me an angry text. "So you changed your locks? Huh? Real nice, a-hole." Turns out, she had been coming over this whole time, and who knows what she had been up to. Just to clarify, no, the new girl didn't know or text my ex, and there was no connection between them. I met both of them on a dating app in a big city. My work schedule was pretty set, so the girl I was dating knew when I was at work. The girl who suggested I change the locks was really nice and normal, but it didn't work out because she was looking for something more serious, and I wasn't ready for that. As for the creepy ex, it's been years now, and she's still obsessing, which has been really stressful. I've done my best to cut all contact with her. Regarding calling the police, I just don't see how that ever helps, especially in a domestic situation. Story 4. I started a new job and shared a small office with a woman my age, along with a couple of other people. She was kind of cute, but also a little strange and very naive. She'd grown up in a very rural area. She would flirt with me constantly, but I wasn't interested. So she started sending me emails, long ones, detailing her entire day. She sent these emails every single day. I never responded. Then one day, she sent me a particularly long email confessing her love for me. I responded with the very obvious reasons why it wouldn't work and asked her to stop sending me emails every day. She didn't listen. The emails kept coming. This went on for months. I asked her, both in person and online, to stop, but still, I received these daily email memoirs. Eventually, I asked another female office mate, who was friends with her, to talk to her. Finally, the email stopped. Bonus. Not too long after, I moved to the other side of the world. After I had been there a few months, one of my former office mates emailed me asking what city I lived in. I told her, and she wrote back saying she had heard that the crazy emailer was moving to the same small city, halfway around the world. That couldn't have been a coincidence, right? I asked for more details, and as she explained, things got even creepier. She was moving into my neighborhood, she'd gotten a job nearby, and she was apparently looking for an old friend. It wasn't until about a week later that my former office mate finally came clean. She had been messing with me the whole time. Story 5. A person I had considered a friend started developing feelings for me. But when she found out I had a girlfriend and that I didn't feel the same way about her, she somehow found out who my girlfriend was. She then DM'd my girlfriend, trying to tell her that I was cheating on her with her, and even accused me of being a child predator. The friend was a couple of years younger than us. Luckily, I was with my girlfriend when she received the DM, so I could explain the situation right away, and we ended up blocking her. The very next day, she messaged my girlfriend again from an alternate account. Story 6. 6 months after our breakup, my ex called me, saying she wanted to see me. It felt a bit odd, but I agreed. When we met, she was friendly and seemed normal. Then, at some point during our conversation, she pulled out a sheet of paper. To my surprise, it had a list on it, specifically a list of all the men she had slept with since we ended things. She then proceeded to read the entire list to me, giving detailed descriptions of every sexual encounter. Needless to say, it was an incredibly awkward moment. Story 7. She stalked me for 5 years after we broke up, sending me letters to every address I lived at during that time. If she didn't have my new address, she'd send them to my parents' house. The one that stands out the most was when she wrote to tell me she was married and that he's a great guy, but he's not you. Once, not long after I'd moved into a new place, I came home to find a box of cookies she had FedExed to me. Eventually, I moved to a different state. I knew from her return addresses that she lived and worked there too, and I was worried we might run into each other, but I figured it was unlikely. Then, less than a year later, she found me through a blog I was keeping and left a message on my voicemail demanding that we meet. I posted a message on the blog, telling her to stop harassing me or I would call the police. Up until then, I had been ignoring her, hoping she'd get the hint. That night, she called again, and I repeated my threat about involving authorities. I haven't heard from her since. Story 8. I met this girl online, and we started chatting a bit. As we talked more, I began to like her, and we seemed to have a lot in common. After a while, we started sharing more personal things, and she sent me a picture of herself. At first, she seemed really sweet and genuine, and the photo seemed to match the vibe I was getting from her. However, not long after, I found out that the picture she had shown me wasn't actually of her. In reality, it was a photo of her friend, who had tragically passed away from cancer. It was a very unsettling revelation. Story 9. I had this one girl who went to extreme lengths to try to get me to accept her as a friend on various social media platforms. Over the course of several months, she created about 50 different accounts on Snapchat, Facebook, and Instagram, all in an attempt to get me to friend her. It was honestly pretty unsettling. I had never met this woman in person, and yet every few weeks, without fail, I would start getting a handful of friend requests from her. At first, I thought it might have just been a coincidence or maybe she was using a few different accounts, but then it became clear that she was deliberately making new ones just to get my attention. Each time I blocked or ignored her, she would pop up again with a new profile, sometimes with different names or photos, but always the same pattern, trying to get me to accept a request. It got to the point where I started to wonder what her obsession was and why she couldn't take a hint. The whole thing became increasingly uncomfortable, and I ended up having to tighten my privacy settings just to prevent her from continuing her attempts. Story 10. I was hanging out with some friends, and they brought along someone I hadn't met before. We ended up hooking up. Right after, she asked where the used condom was, and when I pointed it out, she grabbed it, saying she was going to throw it away. She walked past the trash can, went upstairs, and disappeared. Needless to say, I was pretty anxious, wondering if I might get a call in 9 months or so. Fortunately, I think I'm in the clear, but the whole situation still left me feeling uneasy and creeped out. Story 11. Many years ago, I had a '92 Camaro that I kept in great shape and drove whenever I was on leave. One night, after a date, I was heading home when I got pulled over. I checked my speed and, sure enough, I was doing 85 and a 55. Crap. I pulled over, and a female officer walked up to my car. She asked for my license and registration, the usual stuff. I handed everything over, and she asked me if my car was a '92. I said it was, and she started asking me a ton of questions about it. Had I done any engine work? Replaced the transmission or rear axle? What kind of clutch was on it? Where did I get it from? I answered as best I could, thinking maybe I could get off with a lighter ticket if she was in a good mood. I mentioned that I had bought it at auction a few years ago. She then told me she used to drive a pursuit car, a '92 Camaro, and, as it turned out, that Camaro had been sold at auction a few years back. Then she dropped this bombshell. She lost her virginity in the back seat of that very car. Well, okay then, things started to get even stranger. She said there was a problem with my plate and ran my VIN. Sure enough, it was the exact same car she used to drive. She started flirting with me, but it wasn't just that. She was telling me all sorts of personal things about herself. She told me she didn't lose her virginity until she was 27 because she was a devout Christian, but eventually she realized that God doesn't really care about premarital sex. She also admitted to having experimented with many substances, sampling from evidence. She liked to party. When she saw my military ID, she started talking about a Marine she used to date and how they'd do in public. She kept saying how much she loved our troops. She also mentioned wanting to have kids, a boy and a girl, but couldn't see herself settling down unless it was with a cop or a soldier. I started out feeling confused, but by the time she climbed into the back seat and started telling me she wanted to recreate some of her old memories, I was really starting to get freaked out. Here I was with a full-grown adult woman in her police uniform in my back seat, basically proposing to me and offering to consummate the union right there, on the side of a road in an upscale Miami neighborhood in the middle of the night. An image flashed in my mind, me coming home after dating and breaking up with her, only to find my next girlfriend unalive, with a murder weapon and my fingerprints on it beside her. The thought stuck with me, and I couldn't shake it. I was scared in a way I'd never been before. I quickly made my excuses, told her I had a girlfriend. I didn't actually, my date hadn't gone well at all, and that I had to get up early in the morning. She let me go with just a warning and her phone number. I've never gotten rid of a number so fast in my life. After that, I spent the rest of my leave looking over my shoulder, getting spooked every time I saw a cop car, thinking it might be her. Story 12. I was about to head home after a night out, and as I was getting into my taxi, a girl suddenly jumped in after me. I asked what she was doing, and she confidently said, "I'm coming home with you." That was a hard note from me. The taxi driver stepped in to help, and after I firmly turned down her advances, she eventually got out of the car. Story 13. Somehow, this girl got my number and started texting me, asking if I was going to Club X that night, which I was. I asked her where I knew her from, and she started making up stories, claiming we hooked up the week before at a party I had actually attended. I was confused, thinking, what the hell? I didn't hook up with anyone there. But then I started doubting myself because I had gotten pretty drunk that night. She kept telling all sorts of bizarre stories about how we met, none of which made any sense. At that point, I decided to block her and went to a different party that night. Later, I found out she was a friend of someone I vaguely knew from out of town. That person had shown her my Facebook, and from there, she just started stalking me. Story 14. This isn't my story, but my dentist once shared it with me. He was still in dental school at the time, and as part of his training, he would work at free clinics in poorer areas around the campus to meet his practical requirements. A girl came in several times to get cavities filled, and by the final visit, he told her, "Great, we're done. All your cavities are filled." She gave him a look, leaned back in the chair, and responded with a seductive tone, "Not all of them." At first, it didn't seem that bad, but the catch was that his wife, who was then his serious girlfriend, was the dental assistant. He said the combination of the setting, the situation, and the circumstances creeped him out so much that he almost ran out of the office. Story 15. When I was 16 and still in school, a female classmate became increasingly obsessed with me. She would send me strange messages constantly and always tried to partner with me in science class, staring at me a lot during lessons. I usually just tried to be polite, never going out of my way to interact with her, but eventually, things took a much darker turn. Her messages started to become genuinely worrying, and I didn't know how to handle it. I remember the moment it all got really bad. She sent me a picture of her arm with my name carved into it. I was completely shocked and didn't know what to do. Looking back, I know I should have told someone right away. The next day, I was planning to talk to a teacher or anyone who could help, but before I could say anything, she had already started telling people that I had told her to carve my name into her arm. That was a terrible time. I was attacked at school that day. The police showed up at my house and they took my phone. I was treated like a criminal. Most people, except for my two closest friends, seemed to think I was in the wrong. The next day, I was called into the principal's office and told I was being expelled. My parents were called, and my dad, who was furious, took me home without listening to my side of the story. Thankfully, that night, the police came back with my phone. They told me they had investigated and found that I had nothing to do with her carving my name into her arm. They apologized to me, and it seemed sincere. My dad was informed, and it was made clear that I hadn't done anything wrong. The police had even spoken to the principal, and I was told I could return to school the next day, but that she wouldn't be there when I came back. Story 16. I had been seeing this girl for a few weeks. We went out 3 or 4 times, and eventually things heated up. I brought a condom, but she asked me not to use it, saying she was on birth control. A few days later, she called me in tears, asking me to comfort her. It turns out she was crying because she had lied about being on birth control, and she thought she couldn't get pregnant. She had actually tried to time it right, but clearly, things hadn't gone as planned. That was a pretty eye-opening experience for me. I learned a hard lesson about always using protection, no matter what. I never spoke to her again after that. Story 17. I met a girl a while back when online chat rooms were popular. She had just gotten out of a bad relationship, and we started chatting. From the beginning, I made it clear that I only wanted to be friends. We had a lot in common, enjoyed each other's company, and found out we didn't live too far apart. We'd meet up occasionally to play video games and hang out. After about 2 weeks, she admitted that she was developing feelings for me. I told her that I appreciated the honesty, but that I only saw her as a friend and wanted to keep it that way. From that point on, she started making sexual advances, which I repeatedly turned down. But her attempts grew more persistent and explicit, with her describing all sorts of nasty things she wanted to do to me. Some of the things she said made me incredibly uncomfortable. After a month of this behavior, I realized I couldn't continue the friendship and decided to cut ties. When I told her I wanted to end our friendship, she threatened me. She claimed that the police would believe anything she said, especially over a black person's word. I was terrified, and it's hard to put into words just how I felt that day, but fear was definitely the overwhelming emotion. I blocked her on all platforms and her phone number. Thankfully, that was the last I heard from her. Story 18. There was a girl I worked with who I was always polite with, but I ended up being exposed to much more of her personal life than a coworker should have been. I knew about her family issues, her relationship drama, and pretty much everything else in between. One evening, a few of us went to a bar after work, and as the night wore on, most people left, leaving just the 2 of us around 10 p.m. She hadn't been drinking much. None of us had maybe 3 pitchers of cheap beer between 4 people over the course of 2 hours. But she still managed to sit next to me the whole time, and I noticed she was touching my knee a few times throughout the night. As the night was winding down, I offered to call her an Uber since I felt like walking home. She asked if I would come with her. I asked if she felt unsafe taking an Uber by herself, to which she said no, she just wanted the company. I explained that I wasn't comfortable with that and preferred to go home and relax before work the next day. She seemed visibly upset by that, which made me feel bad. So, I softened up and told her that if she didn't want to be alone, she could walk with me, but I was just doing my own thing, feeding my dog and unwinding before bed. She agreed, and we started walking. About halfway to my place, she suggested we sit on a bench in the park nearby because she was tired. I agreed, and we sat down for a bit. Almost immediately, she rested her head on my shoulder. I asked her if she'd had too much to drink, but she said no. Then, her hand was back on my knee, and it slowly started moving up toward my zipper and button. I told her to stop and made it clear that I only wanted to remain friends and co-workers. She brushed it off and said something like, "Come on, everyone wants this." I had to physically hold her arm back multiple times while telling her to stop, but she kept brushing me off, calling me silly or saying I was hard to get. I couldn't have been clearer with her, and she started getting frustrated, asking if I was gay or if I didn't find her attractive. I tried to explain that this wasn't something I wanted, especially since I was going through a rough breakup and just wanted to focus on work. But she kept pushing. I didn't know how to handle the situation or how to navigate the anxiety of what could go wrong or just how to manage it all in the moment. Eventually, I stopped pushing her hand away, thinking that if I just gave in, it would be over sooner, and proceeded to receive the most stressful BJ I have ever gotten. I couldn't even get on, and all I could do was nervously glance around at the people walking by. After what felt like an eternity, maybe 15 minutes or so, she finally stopped, probably because her jaw was tired. She looked up at me and said, "Okay, I'm done. Can you call me an Uber?" I did, and then spent the next 5 months at that job in an almost constant state of stress and discomfort. Eventually, I quit just so I wouldn't have to see her again. Story 19. I was at a summer camp for blind and visually impaired people, and it wasn't your typical camp setup. One day, we were on the bus heading somewhere, and I was chatting with a friend when he suddenly mentioned, "Oh yeah, there's this girl who told me she likes you. She also said she's planning to sneak into your room at night and watch you sleep. She wanted me to tell you. Otherwise, she threatened to kill me." I thought he was joking, but the next morning, I noticed some of my hair was missing. That's when I thought, what the actual heck? And it didn't just happen once, it happened every night. The next summer, I went back and the weirdness started again. I decided to lock my window each night to keep her out. That's when I heard knocking, louder and more insistent than before, and then her voice whispering, "I know you're in there. Open the damn window." I was freaked out beyond belief. From then on, I slept with my cane next to me just in case. I haven't gone back to that camp since 2018, but I'm planning to return this year. I really hope it doesn't happen again. It was honestly terrifying. Story 20. At one of my first jobs, I was partnered with a woman who outweighed me by about 300 pounds. We were responsible for picking up litter and changing out trash bags at local parks. Whenever I'd been over to pick something up, she'd make comments, often mentioning I had a cute one when we were alone in the truck. She'd even try to catch a glimpse of my boxers whenever they peeked out and would comment on the color. Then, for about a week, another woman joined us on the job, and she outweighed me by maybe 100 pounds. At one point, she made a graphic remark about what a three-way between the three of us would be like and hinted that we could pull over somewhere to make it happen. The whole situation made me feel really uncomfortable, but I doubted my foreman would take me seriously. If anything, I figured he'd just laugh it off or make fun of me, if he believed me at all. Story 21. I dated a girl who had been through a rough breakup and was carrying a lot of emotional baggage. She had serious trust issues because her previous boyfriend cheated on her, so she assumed I might do the same. She didn't like me going to bars with my friends because, in her words, the only reason guys go to bars is to meet other girls. One night, we'd been hanging out, and I went home early for some reason. I don't quite remember why. I was in between apartments and staying in my parents' house at the time. I woke up around 1 a.m. and went downstairs to grab a glass of water. As I walked past the front door, I glanced out the small window, and there was her maroon Oldsmobile Alero slowly creeping by the house with the headlights off, stopping right at the end of the driveway. Clearly, she was checking to see if my car was there to make sure I was really home. I felt pretty unnerved, but decided not to say anything, thinking I didn't want to embarrass her. A couple of days later, I went home early again, turned off all the lights, and waited. Sure enough, she drove by once more. Not long after, she introduced me to one of her friends who, honestly, was way out of my league. My girlfriend found an excuse to leave me alone with her friend for a few minutes, and almost instantly, the friend started asking for my number and hinting that we should hang out. Even I could see this was clearly a setup. I didn't give her my number, left soon after, and ended up breaking up with my girlfriend not long after that. Story 22. Back in high school, I had a close friend who turned me down when I asked her out, saying she wanted to stay just friends. She ended up dating one of my buddies, which was fine with me since she'd introduced me to some of her friends. I never found a serious girlfriend, but I had a great time and met a lot of people through her. After graduation, we went our separate ways and lost touch during college. I eventually met someone, started dating seriously, and married her after college. Not long after the wedding, my old friend got back in touch. By then, she'd been married for a few years to someone I didn't know. We started chatting like old friends again, and she even shared that she was pregnant. I congratulated her, thinking she was just excited, especially since she told me before her husband. Later, she found out she was expecting twins. A few days after that, she confided in me that she had some big regrets. When I asked what she meant, she admitted that she regretted we never got together. I reminded her that she was the one who turned me down back in high school. She then surprised me by saying we should get together, just once. I turned her down, but she insisted, saying there'd be no worry since she was already pregnant. That's when she told me she wished the twins were mine, saying she'd been in love with me all along and had always imagined we'd end up together until I started dating someone seriously. I told her we needed to stop talking. I got the sense she might have been unhappy in her marriage and was looking for a way out. Instead of ending things directly, she may have wanted to create a reason to leave a relationship, knowing I'd once liked her. But I decided to step away completely, telling her we couldn't be friends anymore and encouraging her to focus on her marriage. I blocked her number and never looked back, which wasn't hard since we lived far apart. I told my wife about the whole thing as soon as it happened, and she actually found it amusing. She even kept my old friend on Facebook. Story 23. She climbed up the fire escape from next door and came through my first floor bedroom window. At first, I didn't think much of it. What really freaked me out was when I woke up to find her standing in the middle of my room, just watching me sleep. She actually tilted her head to the side with a strange smile and said, "Hello, sleepyhead." It was honestly really unsettling. I put chains on my windows after that, telling her it was to keep the cat from getting out of the window. Story 24. When I was single, I dated around as you do. This was back in the days of the early internet before smartphones, so things were a bit different. I met a lot of interesting people. Let's just say some of them were pretty unusual. One of the strangest experiences was with a girl I met online on Wednesday. By Sunday night, she was standing outside my bedroom window. We had met in person on Friday, and things had escalated quickly. The next day, we went to a barbecue with her family, and she introduced me as her new long-term boyfriend. Her mom was asking about future plans like kids and such. It was all pretty intense. On Sunday, I went out with my friends and went to the movies. I turned my phone off for a bit, but when I turned it back on, I had 14 voicemails from her. She was upset, convinced I was cheating, and wanted to know where I was. Keep in mind, I'd only met her in person 2 days earlier. I just shrugged it off with my friends, thinking it was a bit much. But then, at 2 a.m., I got a text saying, "We need to talk. I know you're in there. I'm watching you right now." She was standing outside my window. At that point, I was totally freaked out, and she tried to force her way inside. Afterward, she left a 4-page letter at my door that was an unsettling look into her thoughts. She kept bothering me for the next couple of months, but eventually, she moved on to another guy. I occasionally check her social media now, and she seems more stable, maybe even a bit live, laugh, love-ish. I do wonder what would have happened if we'd stayed together or gone on another date. I'm guessing she might have gotten really possessive. Story 25. I was staying at my friend's house, sleeping in his guest room while he was at work. His girlfriend was home, and the guest room had a heavy door that needed something heavy to prop it open, or it would slam shut. Normally, I sleep with the door closed. One morning, I woke up and, as usual, lay in bed for a little while before getting up. Then, out of nowhere, I saw the door slowly open. The light was still off, but the hallway light illuminated the doorway enough that I could see someone standing there. I kept my eyes half open, and sure enough, it was her, just standing in the doorway, staring at me. I didn't move. I was freaked out but curious to see what would happen next. She just stood there, for what felt like at least 10 minutes. She didn't look away. She didn't walk around the room. She just stood there. I was lying in a way that let me see her, but she couldn't tell my eyes were open. I thought she might have come in to grab something from the closet, but no, she didn't move. I waited, hoping she would leave or do something, but she just stood there. Finally, I pretended to wake up, and as soon as I moved, I heard her rush out, and the door slammed behind her. I got up and went into the kitchen, where she was acting completely normal, super bubbly, like nothing had happened at all. She didn't seem to acknowledge that she had just spent 10 minutes standing there, watching me sleep. Story 26. I dated a girl who, later on, I discovered was not only a compulsive liar but also involved in witchcraft. After I couldn't handle her behavior anymore, I broke things off. She started waiting outside my door for long periods of time until I came home, just to say she had left something in my place. This happened frequently. One day, I was about to add a new email account to my phone and realized that her email account was still saved in my contacts. I shouldn't have checked it, but she had been stalking me, and I felt I needed to know what I was up against. What I found were tons of emails to some witchcraft practitioner she had found online. She was paying this woman hundreds of dollars an hour for what I would describe as witch consulting. The emails were all about me, how to cast spells to win me back, how to enchant me, how to curse my new girlfriend, and all kinds of strange things. It seemed like she was using this woman as a kind of relationship therapist, asking her all sorts of questions about our situation. This went on for months. It was clear the witch was getting frustrated with her, though she couldn't complain too much because she was making thousands of dollars from her. At one point, the girl told the witch that I had suggested she seek professional help. The witch responded, "That might not be a bad idea," which made me laugh. Eventually, she moved into the house of a mutual friend, who lived just one building away from mine. My friend mentioned that she was always burning strange spices and candles, all at the suggestion of the witch. It was all pretty unsettling, and things took an even darker turn when she ended up cutting the brakes on my car. Story 27. I had gone on 2 dates with a girl, and then one day, I received an anonymous text from her best friend claiming that we had met at a bar the night before and offering to come over to my place. The thing was, I rarely went to bars because I worked the night shift, so I knew for sure I hadn't met anyone there. After some questioning, I eventually got the girl to confess. She told me she was just testing me to see if I was trustworthy. Needless to say, I didn't see her again. Story 28. I met a girl at a bar, and we ended up back at her place. We spent the night together, and everything seemed fine. There were no red flags, and I would have definitely considered seeing her again. However, things took a strange turn the next morning. I woke up around 5 a.m. and started getting dressed because I had to head home and get ready for work. When she woke up and saw me getting dressed, she completely flipped out. She started yelling, saying, "You can't leave." I tried to explain that I had to go to work and that I'd call her later, but she wasn't having it. And then she snapped. I had to physically fight my way out of her apartment, leaving with a few scratches as souvenirs. I have no idea what set her off, and needless to say, I never went back to that bar again. Story 29. I went on a blind date, and the conversation was okay for the most part, except that she kept talking about her dachshund. She had sweaters for it, a special bag to carry it around in, and so on. Then, out of nowhere, she looked at me and said, "I really love my dog." I nodded, figuring it was obvious by now. But then she stared at me intensely and said, "No, I don't think you understand. I really, really love my dog." I paid for the meal, wished her well, and we parted ways. Maybe that was her way of wrapping up the date. Honestly, I wasn't sure, but I didn't feel the need to find out anymore. Story 30. I went on my one and only Tinder date, and it turned out to be quite the experience. She told me she had just signed her divorce papers that very day, and then proceeded to lay out a one-year plan for us, how we date and eventually get married. I let her know I wasn't interested in a second date, but she thanked me for my opinion and politely declined not having one. Thankfully, we met somewhere neutral rather than at my house, like she had suggested at first. I can't imagine what might have happened if she knew where I lived. It was a weird situation, especially considering I'm not exactly someone women would typically be drawn to. It felt more like a "hi, I don't know anything about you, but we're getting married by the end of the year. Your opinion doesn't matter" kind of deal. Story 31. Years ago, I worked as a bartender at a small dive bar. One late night, a lone female guest came in. She was probably middle-aged, polite, and short while ordering her drink. Nothing seemed unusual, so I carried on with my closing duties, sweeping the floor and tidying up around the tables. As I turned around to dump the dustpan, I was surprised to see her standing right behind me, staring me directly in the eye. "Will you dance with me?" she asked, nervously, in a slow tone. Keep in mind, there was no music playing, and we were the only two people in the bar. I politely explained that I was closing up and couldn't dance at the moment, so I quickly walked behind the bar to create some space. In the 5 seconds it took me to walk through the kitchen, she had returned to her stool and was suddenly crying hysterically. She started asking me a barrage of questions. "Do you think I'm ugly? Am I fat? Am I unattractive? Am I a bad person?" and other hurtful things. I tried my best to reassure her, denying everything and deflecting the accusations. Then, she screamed that she hated me before running out of the bar. I rang up her beer as a waste and locked the door behind her. I worked at that bar for another 7 years, but I never saw the guest again. Story 32. A few years ago, I started spending time with a girl who was part of my friend group. She would come to trivia nights with us occasionally, and at first everything seemed fine. However, over time, I started noticing some unusual behaviors. For example, she never seemed to sleep much and would often jump from one activity to another without finishing what she started. She'd start a shower, then move on to cooking, and then sit down to tend to her plants, almost like she was forgetting what she was doing. At one point, she even put a sign out on her lawn with her phone number, hoping to connect with strangers. Things got stranger from there. One day, I mentioned that I liked thunderstorms, and she became convinced that I could actually cause them. At first, I thought she was joking, but her serious tone started to make me uneasy. Then one night when I was staying over, I woke up to find her just sitting in bed, watching me. She placed her hand on my chest and whispered that she could hear the beautiful fishes in my blood. The very next morning, her father burst into her apartment, clearly upset, urging her to see the psychiatrist she had been avoiding. She confided in me that her family and doctors had been encouraging her to seek help for what they suspected was bipolar disorder, and that she felt like they wanted to shut her brain off. Eventually, her friends and family convinced her to get the help she needed. She bravely faced her challenges, got the support she needed, and now, after getting the proper care, we've become very close friends. Story 33. A friend's girlfriend showed up at my door one night, visibly intoxicated, and began expressing her feelings for me. She had built up a fantasy in her mind about a secret relationship between us, even claiming that we had our song and other personal details. She told me that the only reason she was still with my friend was so that she could see me. Needless to say, I was very uncomfortable. I calmly told her that I wasn't interested in any way and made sure she got home safely. Afterward, I called my friend to let him know what had happened. When he confronted her, she claimed that we had been intimate that night. He then called me on speakerphone while she was present, asking for the truth. I repeated the same story I had told him earlier, and he ended the relationship right there, asking her to leave his house. About 6 months later, she emailed me saying that she missed me. I chose not to respond. Story 34. I'm on the train, and there's this girl behind me having the most boring phone conversation I've ever heard. She's talking about some guy she thinks is cute or something. I keep listening, though, mostly because she's speaking so loudly that it's hard to ignore, and things get strange. The guy she's describing sounds almost identical to me. So I turn around, and this girl says, "Oh, he's looking at me now. I wonder what he'll do. I wonder if he likes me." Then I realize she doesn't have a phone. Yeah, I got off at the next stop and put a whole train between me and that strange situation. Edit. No, she wasn't cute. Story 35. I went on a date with a girl I've been chatting with online. We exchanged pictures, and everything seemed fine, so we agreed to meet for lunch and see how things went. During lunch, she was incredibly giggly, like everything we said had some hidden double meaning. At first, it was alright, but after a while, it started to feel a little off. After lunch, I wasn't really feeling the connection and was planning to wrap things up, but she suggested we head back to my place. Honestly, she was attractive enough that I agreed. Once we got to my apartment, she said she needed to use the bathroom. She was in there for about 20 minutes, so I figured she was just taking her time. When she finally came out, she had this huge smile on her face. We started chatting, and she mentioned that she noticed we used the same shampoo. Then, she pointed out that we also had the same soap, toothpaste, and several other toiletries. That's when I realized she had spent a lot of time going through my shower, medicine cabinet, and under the sink storage. It really freaked me out. Story 36. I'm a father, and I make it a priority to keep the women I date separate from my daughter's life, at least until the relationship becomes serious. Despite my best efforts, I've had a few women try to insert themselves into the picture. They've shown up at my house unannounced, gone to my daughter's school without warning, and refused to leave when they stayed over, even when my daughter was coming home from staying with family. One even hung around outside my house while my daughter was playing outside, trying to talk to her. The strangest thing was when a girl I'd been seeing for a few months took photos from my Facebook of me and my daughter and used them as her profile picture. I had only accepted her friend request, and I hadn't really looked at her profile, but she had essentially created a family album with those photos. It was all pretty unsettling. Story 37. I had a one-night fling in college where I was borderline blackout drunk. I think she asked if I liked her, and I drunkenly said yes. The next night, I had her come over again. I woke up to the sound of her rummaging around my apartment. So I opened one eye to see what she was up to. She was going through my drawers, closets, and food cabinets. Eventually, I got up and asked what she was doing. She said she just wanted to get to know me better and started asking about things she found, including medications in my bathroom. I told her to put her clothes on and leave. Story 38. A while ago, I was dating a woman who told me her grandmother had passed away and left her a huge inheritance. She said my family and I had been so great to her that she bought me a brand new car as a thank you. I was driving that car with pride until things started getting weird. She became really evasive about the details of the deed and registration. That's when I found out she was a pathological liar. It turns out she had taken a car for a test drive and just never brought it back. As crazy as that sounds, it gets worse. She faked sonograms to convince me she was pregnant, and those long trips to the ATM I thought were just for cash turned out to be her meeting clients she found on Craigslist. Oh, and she even faked her mother's death so she could manipulate her way into moving in with me. Sadly, that's only part of the story. Every bit of it is true, but I'm not sure anyone will even believe it. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.